So we'll go ahead and we'll get right down to business. By all accounts, this has been a roller coaster of a ride, but by all accounts, Hayfield is now out of the playoffs, somewhat bringing an end, at least to this point of the saga. I want to know your thoughts, your feelings when you were first made aware that Hayfield would be out.
I found out the same time as everyone else when the superintendent sent a note to the community. Um, I don't feel a sense of relief. I just feel a deep regret and sadness, disappointment, frustration, and frankly outrage. The same sentiments that have been expressed to me by community members because we have an entire football season where we can't hit the reset button. This is a team that never should have played at all this season. Um, it was obvious to everyone in the community as early as last February, April, that there was a stacking of the deck. There were 31 players who came from other schools, including 14 from Freedom High School. And it was well known. I mean, the football community is a small community. It's a community that talks, and there's, many boosters, there's many community members who follow it closely. And so it's certainly the case that like the VHS, that's not the first time the VHSL rules have been broken. But and historically it's been onesies and twosies. There might be like a Michael Jordan of a particular sport who ends up playing for a team other than their home school. But to have 31 players, there's a difference between something in the gray zone and then driving a truck through a loophole. And what was frustrating, especially, was that FCPS delayed its investigation, and then at a time when, in the past year, I've been a school board member, and in the 10 years I've been heavily involved in our public schools, I've seen FCPS refer matters routinely, almost every other week, it seems, to an outside law firm to investigate this, investigate that. And always something of much smaller scale, smaller scope. And then you have this, which is perhaps the greatest local sports scandal in the history of the Commonwealth. Something that is not just about transfers and eligibility. It's about, improper fundraising, improper expenditure of funds, social media policy violations, cyberbullying. Who knew what when? Who decided what when? What was known at the time they hired this coach? And why was the previous coach who had the best record in Region 6C dismissed? None of this makes sense, right? And so as it does routinely, FCPS should have hired an outside law firm to come in, offer a comprehensive, independent investigation, and instead, FCPS decided to do it in-house. Now, does FCPS employ Sherlock Holmes? No, it doesn't. It does not have in-house capacity, competency, experience, expertise, right? I mean, does FCPS review one-offs, a boss sexually harassing a subordinate, or someone who says something they didn't, or someone who does something with a student they shouldn't? Yes, but those are usually one or two people at most, fairly isolated incidents, and frankly, that's a reflection that we have one residency investigator in the whole county. One, as of last January, February, when I dealt with some of my very first matters on the school board, a couple kids in elementary schools. Are they here? Are they not? They had complicated family situations, hard to figure out. But once we have 31, you need a team, right?
Mm.
You need a team of people who do this day in, day out, mean potatoes. What you don't want to do is what FCPS did, which on the Tuesday in August, where superintendent announced the results of their internal investigation, she pointed with pride to the fact that the assistant superintendent had done bed checks at 7 homes on a Sunday morning with only 10 or 15 minutes notice. Here's my thoughts on that. I'm not going to volunteer to go teach Greek or Chinese because that's not my training. That's not my credentials, right? The assistant superintendent has a job description, right? And it's to lead a particular region within FCPS. It's not to go do bed checks. The person we employ as a residency investigator is a former police officer because that's the background, that's the training, that's the qualifications. And so that was only kind of one example of how this investigation, which was really sloppy, really slapdash, rushed, was thrown together, cobbled together, rather than thoroughly conducted by the book, right? They weren't following the protocols. And so what came out was an announcement that there's nothing wrong here. None of the allegations have been substantiated, right? And that's like, okay, I hit someone in the head with a bat. I can't find a rule. That must be okay. There's nothing there. Those are two irreconcilable facts, right?
Sure.
31 players, and then there's nothing wrong with that. It goes against all common sense. Now, do do any of those 31 players live in Fairfax County? Maybe. I don't know. Like maybe one, maybe 31. But the facts have never been credibly investigated. And what we're left with at the end of the day is a situation where uh, the lack of a credible investigation has created the opportunity for the train wreck that we currently find
Sure.
ourselves in. And Hayfield's out of the playoffs. But let me be clear, this scandal is not over because what what remains is our allegations, revelations that are coming out seemingly hour by hour, day by day. And so this is not the last or any type of resolution because it leaves a gaping hole in the regulations that again other schools, other counties could drive a truck through.
Mm.
And so what we need to do at this point is twofold. One, we need a comprehensive investigation of what happened here from, the hiring of the coach to where we are today. Second, we need to have a comprehensive independent investigation preferably by a law firm without a pre-existing relationship with the superintendent or FCPS. So it's really independent, right? Someone who doesn't have a dog in the fight, stake in the game, a financial incentive to reach a particular outcome. And we need to have them look at how has FCPS handled this because it's handled it badly. It's handled
Mm.
it fairly incompetently. And so we need to know both how do we make sure that we restore the integrity of our athletics program, but we also need to figure out how do we rebuild public trust in FCPS leadership. And we can only do that if we hold the system and the leadership accountable, right? With transparency, publishing the findings, and then whatever recommendations are made by that outside law firm or organization, we need to expedite their implementation. So before we get to the spring athletic season, before we get to next football season, the system is restored and people can know when their child goes on that playing field that it's a level playing field, that the games are being played in accordance with established rules that are fairly and consistently enforced, and no one's putting their thumb on the scale to tip the scales in favor of one team. I'll tell you something. When I saw the result of that first playoff game, Edison versus Hayfield, and it was 75-7, most of the season it's been by at least 40 points, and I've
Sure.
witnessed one or two of those games. But that was a stain on our system. This whole scandal has tarnished the reputation of FCPS when we are at this critical moment in public education where people are making a debate between school choice, right, like private school with vouchers, and public schools. And I'll say under this superintendent, she's a great leader on almost every front, right? We've made positive academic gains in a number of areas. We're implementing a new science of reading literacy curriculum in elementary schools this year, so every kid learns to read on time, on schedule. And yet, instead of being able to talk about all these great positive news stories, which will help to rebuild public trust in our public schools, we are compelled on a daily, hourly basis to talk about this Hayfield football scandal, which frankly you know, I know, every person watching this knows there's a standard playbook for this, right? Whether you're in government, the private sector, schools, you know, scandal arises, you hire a third party, they do their investigation, they make recommendations, you implement the recommendations, and then clean bill of health, right? This is routine. Like anyone watching TV, anyone sitting at home in their Barca lounger knows this playbook, right? You don't have to be a high-paid superintendent or CEO. And yet that playbook wasn't followed here. And the question is why?
Sure.
And I don't have any answers to that. But what I do know is that the community has a lot of questions, a lot of suspicions. It reeks of a cover up. And then the question is, well, what is there to cover up? You know, conspiracy theories tend to proliferate in a vacuum. And here, without a credible, independent investigation to really tell us what the facts are, to make those findings public so the public sees what the facts are, and then recommendations, and the public can see those recommendations being implemented, you're just eroding trust further, which trust is already at a low point after the pandemic. We need to do better. Our
That's
community
right.
expects better, and we can do better. It shouldn't be this hard. We just need to stop digging the hole deeper and chart a new direction with transparency, sunshine, and accountability.
I tell you what, I think that you answered just about every one of the questions that I had with your opening statement here. But I do want to go here because one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is because, like I said, in what it is that you and your other two colleagues that you all put out this morning, I thought it was so balanced. I thought that it was so well thought out. I thought it was so fair. Everything that it is that you all said, and one of the things that we have not seen, albeit through the media or through social media, throughout this entire debacle, is a ton of balance and fairness. I think that we've seen a lot of stories told from one side or the other side, but not much coming in the middle. And I thought that you all were doing a great job with walking that line. So to that point, in my coverage of this, because I've been on this beat since the allegations first arose as well, and a ton of my reporting was based, as you just spoke to, a ton of my reporting was based in the, hey, FCPS cleared this school. And if FCPS cleared this school, then that's what I'm reporting until something else is said. So, from your perspective, what was that like to be able to see? Because I know that, you have your job, but we don't have blinders on. So, what was it like for you all to see all of this media storm and all of the misinformation and disinformation and lack of information all around?
Well, I appreciate the question. Let me say, you know, the school board is a part-time job, right?
Sure.
And so, you know, a lot of people they run when they're retired or they have a spouse paying the mortgage. But you know, I still gotta have a day job because, gosh, it's expensive to live here, right?
Yes, it is.
Um, and uh, and so for my day job, I'm an attorney. And so I've been an attorney for 22 years, and for a significant portion of that time. I have led investigations, I've conducted investigations, I've participated in investigations, public, private sector. I've seen everything from campaign finance to environmental violations to employee misconduct and so forth. So I came to the school board with that background, and so when FCPS decided to conduct the investigation in-house rather than referring it outside. I had questions. I said, I think that's a terrible idea. I said, I don't think you guys know how to conduct an investigation of this magnitude.
Sure.
Something small and simple, sure, you do that day in, day out because it's not frequent. Something of this magnitude, it's just on a different order of magnitude, right? And so when I watched how it was done and then how the results were announced and the content of that announcement, um, as someone who's lived it, done it, I could say that that is not thorough, it's not complete, it's not credible. And indeed, even at that meeting, no one bought it, right? Because again, the two irreconcilable facts. 31 kids transfer in, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? You can't reconcile that.
Mm.
Something is amiss. And if you clear it, then it just says, okay, well, you didn't do it right. 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 5. And
What was the pushback? What was the pushback from your colleagues there? Because I mean, clearly, you all came to a vote on this and it wasn't even close. So what was the other side?
so on August 29th, I brought a motion to after the internal investigation results were announced, I brought a motion to have a comprehensive and independent investigation. And all of the video is online. I mean, you can even look on, if you type in my name to YouTube, you can find the clips just of that, of what I said that night. And what I said was this, look, FCPS doesn't know how to do something of this scope. There
Mm,
are people who do this day in, day out. We go hire them. They tell us what to do. We do it. Problem solved. And in fact, that's what FCPS does all the time as a routine matter, of course, for scandals or just matters that are much smaller and simpler. The pushback was, well, we support the superintendent.
mm,
We support the superintendent. And, if she says the sky is green, the sky is green. And look, I want to be very clear. Like I have spoken repeatedly, publicly, privately, that I support the superintendent. She is the right leader for the right time at this critical moment in the history of public education in this country. But, but no one's perfect, right? We're imperfect as God made us. And in this case, for this scandal, it has been handled poorly. And I would say incompetently from day one.
mm.
Now, that's not me saying the superintendent's a bad person.
Sure.
I make mistakes too, but but uh, there's a difference between saying I support the superintendent, so I'm just going to defer to whatever she says, and then doing the job of the school board, which is to provide oversight, to provide scrutiny, to provide accountability on behalf of your constituents. And maybe, some of my colleagues have said, look, you brought the motion like during the hearing. You didn't tell us in advance. We
Mm,
didn't have conversations. And that's fair. That's a fair point. Like, but the that was, about a day and a half after that Tuesday meeting, where the superintendent announced the results. And I'm a new school board member. This
sure.
is August. I'm figuring things out and I'm like mulling over like this doesn't seem right. This doesn't like this is wrong. But at that point I was, what, 8 months into the job and I'm still feeling my way through. And I got to the school board meeting that night and I said, you know what? There's only one path forward, and that's to get a third party who really can be impartial, offer us an objective assessment because I had listened to the community between that meeting and at that meeting and then the school board hearing and there was just a complete lack of belief. I mean, and to this day the handling of the investigation and then the post hoc justifications require almost a complete suspension of disbelief. Like, you've seen better like fantastical movies in the theater than the explanations offered. I mean, in recent, you go back and read the FCPS press releases, right? For the past like 6 months. What you'll see is this drumbeat that continues to increase over time. VHSL, VHSL, VHSL. And I'm like, you know what? We can point fingers all we want. VHSL didn't hire this coach.
Mm,
VHSL didn't allow these players to come all of a sudden from places when they might not live here, right? VHSL didn't conduct that internal investigation and then deny a motion to conduct an independent investigation. VHSL did wait until the eve of the playoffs, which
mm,
I don't think makes sense for anyone, right? Why would you do that? Why would you wait till the eve of the playoffs when you know about this for 11 months? Why did VHSL write a decision that, in my opinion, as a lawyer, was written in crayon, right? I mean, it was so poorly justified that anyone reading that is like, I'm going to take this to the judge. You'll get tossed out in a second. I could see that. Anyone could see that, attorney or not. And so, VHSL should have anticipated litigation, anticipated the disruption, which is maximum disruption feasible to the playoffs, to the parents, to the community
Sure.
members, right? And so VHSL has to be held accountable for that. But at the end of the day, it's like 90% FCPS and 10% VHSL, maybe, right? In terms of blame. And but FCPS hasn't articulated, I haven't heard from the school board, I haven't heard from the superintendent. The buck stops with me, right? President Truman said it best. The buck stops with me. We are accountable. And what I also see is a bunch of statements issued by the school board, but it's not the school board. It's some members of the school board, not the one today that I did with two of my colleagues, but responses. The city of Fairfax school board last week demanded an independent investigation. What was the response of some members of the school board? Oh, there's a court looking at this. There's a court. Okay, the court is looking at whether VHSL followed its own rules in enacting a 2-year playoff ban. That court proceeding is not the equivalent or a substitute for an independent investigation, right? Uh, the FCPS has also said, oh, well, there was an outside attorney at the time of the internal investigation in August who read the notes of the investigation. Okay, let me repeat that.
That's right.
Read the notes of the investigation. I have it verbatim because there's a recording of that meeting. The investigation notes, the notes of this, the notes of that. Not not that that outside attorney did not interview anyone, did not investigate anything, did not, go and do a thorough document review. Like that's what I've done when I do an internal investigation.
And
She
to
read,
be clear, what it is that you're speaking of now is the thought that there was a third party, quote unquote, that looked at this situation. That's what you're
right.
speaking to now.
That's right. So at the time of the internal investigation in August 2024, there was an outside attorney they hired to read the notes. And so FCPS says, well, that's an external review. And I'm like, okay, is there 1 page of notes, 1,000 pages of notes? We don't know. Were the notes edited? Did everyone take notes? We don't know. But what we do know is the superintendent said there were 420 hours spent. That may sound like a lot, but that's two people working for 1 month, right? 40 hours a week times
Mhm.
4 weeks, right? That's not very much time. That's not very much time at all. Normally, for an investigation of this scope, you're talking thousands of hours, which means if you're going to do it in a short amount of time, you need a big team of attorneys, paralegals, other people, right? And yeah, that's expensive. Don't get me wrong, but for the biggest sports scandal in Fairfax County, maybe the history of the Commonwealth, you need to have that thorough assessment, independent assessment, comprehensive assessment. And I welcome the fact that the superintendent has announced, within the last few days, we're going to do an external review. But what's the external review of? Student transfers. Okay. That's not sufficient. That's a piece of the puzzle. But at this point, I have as many questions about Hayfield sorry, I have as many questions about how FCPS has handled this
That's
since
right.
its inception as I do about the scandal itself, right? Now
Right.
there's the scandal, but now there's a scandal within that scandal, and we have to be accountable to the public because when I speak to constituents, and I'll tell you, my phone has been blowing up for days and days, especially since Friday when that first playoff game was canceled. That wasn't just a football game, that was senior night, band night,
Mm.
cheer night. And boosters had bought thousands of dollars in concessions for each of those stadiums, right? So lots of food wasted, lots of people really angry because it impacted them in a profound and direct way for the first time. So the universe of people affected exploded and community outrage exploded accordingly. And so, is this external review of student transfers? Is that enough? No, it's too little, too late. Is pulling Hayfield out of the playoffs enough? No, too little, too late. Like these are things that should have been done back last spring, right? Last spring was when all of this should have been resolved in a neat little bundle well before playoff season
I,
started, right? Or
I,
well before the football season started.
I think that that's my biggest takeaway, right? Is and again, back when this first came to light, I think that my hope I've covered high school sports in this region for 11 years. I mean, there's been a lot of backlash that I've gotten for what I feel as though is telling a balanced story from different people in the community, but it's because I genuinely care about every single one of these schools. I don't even live in Fairfax County, but I've covered these programs for so long. What I've always said to myself is, man, I really wish that whatever the circumstance was, whatever the final verdict was, that this could have been handed down before the season ever even started, so
Oh
that we
yeah.
never got here.
That's right. And meanwhile, you have throughout the course of the season, you've had I've received many reports of FCPS employees being silenced, being threatened,
Yeah,
being retaliated against, right?
sure.
And I have concrete examples. I have the receipts, right? And so the question is, if we did everything right with that internal investigation, if that was, the bee's knees, then why do we need to silence people, right? I mean, I know I've worked for the federal government. When I worked for the federal government, and if I worked for the Department of Defense, I could go out and I could write a newspaper article on defense
Mhm.
policy or the military because all I would have to do is put a little disclaimer in there. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not on behalf of my employer, right? These are my own views, not those are the views of the US government. As long as I did that, that little disclaimer, I was free to say whatever I want on any subject because you know what? That's my First Amendment right.
Sure.
So why is it that we are so scared of what FCPS employees have to say? Why is it that we need, based on the reports, did it? I know of a couple cases where it did happen. I have the receipts, but more generally, like that requires an independent investigation. So, what I do know is that right now FCPS has a whistleblower this retaliation policy where all whistleblowers have to report to the Office of Division Counsel. Guess who the Division Counsel reports to? The superintendent. So if you're going against the superintendent, guess what?
Right.
You're not going to make disclosures, number one. Number two, you might be retaliated against. That's a risk. In the federal government, who do the whistleblowers report to? They report to the Office of Inspector General. Our inspector general, we call them the auditor general, they report directly to the school board. So
Mm.
I put out in my statement today with Ricardi Anderson and Ryan McElveen that all whistleblower disclosures should be made to the auditor general who reports to the school board, and any instances or allegations of retaliation should be investigated by that school board auditor general because then we're protecting people who work for the system but are afraid to report to the system. We did have 6 coaches come forward at great personal risk, right? We've had other people come forward, but you know that that doesn't always end well, right? And so we need to make sure that we're encouraging dissent. Like I'll offer an example. The State Department has something called the dissent channel. So every embassy in the world, if you say, hey, US policy in this country or that country, or this region or that region is we think it's wrong, they can send a formal like memo via, telex, fax, whatever old-fashioned technology the State Department uses, and it can say that we're using the dissent channel. So even though we're disagreeing with whatever the official policy is, but we think it's so important that you need to know about this. And that dissent channel is protected by federal regulation. And I will be advocating for FCPS to institute that too, because when people have a different point of view, it doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean, they're rogue. It just means we need to listen to them because we might learn something. When we learn this in kindergarten, right? When we open our ears instead of using our mouth, we learn something, right? And the more we listen, if we had listened to the community, from the beginning, if we had listened to common sense, frankly, none of this would have happened. And we would have investigated more thoroughly at the outset rather than this kind of very limited review that's been promised now and leaving a lot of cards on the table, a lot of people who aren't being held accountable.
To that point, to the point of the freedom of expression, the fact that coaches couldn't speak on this, I felt from a media perspective, I felt that that said cover up. I felt that it said that there was something going on here that we shouldn't be talking about. I thought that was a bad look for you all.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I can't even tell you how many reporters and other folks I spoke to who said, the practice within Fairfax County and then everywhere else in Northern Virginia is, reporters go up to the coaches on the sideline and say, "Hey, what's going on? Your kid's got a bum knee, or oh, this team you're playing is really strong. Boy, they seem dominant." Um, and that's that kind of informal relationship and engagement has existed for what, years, decades, and all of a sudden, uh, I've been receiving reports that coaches can't talk anymore. Their jobs are threatened. Their coaching positions are threatened.
I
You
had a
know,
great interview with the coach just last week, and he told me right after we did it that he had just received an email and that I couldn't run
ain't that something? And
it.
this, I'm sorry. Are we living in the information age, or
Sure,
are we
sure.
living in the I don't know what to say about that. We're in what, 2024?
Yeah,
And we're silencing people? Is that what we're doing?
that's right.
Is, we're supposed to be the best school system in the state, right? And I'll say I've lived here for 20 years. My wife and I moved to Fairfax County and the Mount Vernon district specifically, so our kids could attend the best public schools, like bar
Mm,
none. I grew up moving around a lot. Never lived in Virginia until, 20, 25 years ago, but I had heard of Fairfax County, all these places I lived. I knew it was the best. And so, we are supposed to be in a place where we're the best and we're confident in being the best. And we model the values that we want to teach our children, right? But this is a situation where the adults have totally failed our children, right? We should model integrity. We should model good sportsmanship. We should model transparency. And those values have not been on display throughout this time. And I'll say one more thing, because we included it in our joint statement today, but it's not being talked about enough. But all this turmoil, right?
that's right.
All these emotions that have
Yep.
been, all this disruption, it's also given rise to a very ugly side
Yes.
of America, which is there are a number of those student athletes who came into Hayfield who have been subjected to racist
Yep.
attacks online through social media and otherwise. And we have to say, you know, how abhorrent that is. It's contrary to our values of our school system, of our community. It doesn't represent us. And whatever keyboard warrior is typing online, spewing such hate, you don't belong here because hate has no home here. It has no place in our community, and we must wholeheartedly condemn it, both through our words and our actions. And so we need to go back to square one and not just figure out what happened in the scandal, figure out how FCPS leadership failed here, but also look at ourselves and our community and see what do we need to do in this respect to make sure that our values of respect, diversity, and inclusion are being practiced on and off the sports field.
That was one of the things that truly, truly got me. Again, it is due to my love for all of these student athletes and all of these communities. I got to the point where it's like, listen, man, like it doesn't who's right or who's wrong, we'll get to that. We will get to who's right or who's wrong, but we have to treat people the same way that we would want for others to treat our kids. I'm a father. For me, that's not that challenging. I would never want anyone to treat my son this way, so we shouldn't treat other people's children this way either.
That's exactly right. We can talk about high school football and and we imagine, this is the NFL, or this is, the college football, we're watching Notre Dame or something like this. But at the end of the day, these are kids. These are children, right? None of these children made the decision to move to Hayfield, right? These decisions were made by adults. And maybe the adults made the right decision, Maybe the adults made the wrong decision. But at the end of the day, we have to hold the adults accountable because it's not just the adults of these families, it's the adults who hired this coach, who allowed this to happen. It's the adults who allowed the matter to continue through the summer when it was finally looked at, but not in a credible way. It's the adults who decided not to have an independent review and who allowed this scandal to gradually, expand and expand until it exploded into the public consciousness and disrupted so many lives, right? Think about the children who were displaced, right? There are Hayfield football players who had to leave Hayfield for other schools in FCPS because they were not welcomed onto that team, right? Their college scholarship opportunities, their scouting opportunities, definitely affected. And maybe they made the team at that other school, or maybe they just said, you know what, I'm done because I just can't. It's just too much. Think of the students who moved to Hayfield, and some of them were ruled ineligible to play in their senior year, which is, the time when coaches from colleges across the country say, okay, give this kid money or not. It might affect their college prospects, right? And maybe they have the money, maybe they don't to pay for college on their own. But, that's a we all know college is just you break the bank to send any kid to college, even for a year nowadays. So that's real money, real dollars. So both the kids who are displaced and the kids who came to Hayfield have been affected, and then their families and their siblings and the community at large, right? There's just so many kind of, you know, ripple effects
Mhm.
that have happened here through a series of decisions by adults mostly making wrong decisions, right? I mean, I've seen a couple right decisions, the external review, the limited external review into student transfers, but not enough making, hey, let's throw open the doors. Let's really invite someone in to take a comprehensive look, tell us what's what, and tell us the path forward so that we can dig ourselves not down, but out of this
Oh,
hole and establish a clean slate, especially, let me say this, especially before the spring athletic season,
that's
right?
right.
Winter, like, we're not going to make it. Spring, though, we could. And next football season, for sure, for sure, because most of the players who got us into this mess are still there,
That's right.
right? Should they be there? That's not my call as a school
Sure.
board member. But
Well,
I can tell you I've heard from the community, and most of the mess is still there, right? Most of those student transfers are not seniors graduating, they're still there. We need to figure this out.
So
We need
to
to figure
that,
it
and
out
we have
today.
about 90 seconds, but I want to make
Yeah.
sure that we cover all grounds. Balance, fairness is what I'm going for. I have not spoken to a parent of a student athlete that transferred in. I've only spoken to to Hayfield parents that were at Hayfield. And those parents tell me that Coach Overton has been great to them. They tell me that to their knowledge, all of those students actually live in Hayfield. And so today, those parents, that community is heartbroken as well. What's your message in 60 seconds to those parents and that community?
I've spoken to individuals, parents who were offered the opportunity to provide a fake address or be declared homeless. So I know that I have the receipts. There's credible allegations of wrongdoing. For the folks who transferred in, I wish them the best of luck. It's a really tough situation, and we need to figure out what the facts are because until we know what the facts are, we can't move forward as families, as schools, as communities, or as a system.
Well, all right, Mateo, you are the man, and I thank you so very much for talking with me. And again, fairness, balance, commitment to the community. That's what you've displayed. I thank you for that.
Thank you. I hope you have a great evening.
Ricardo Report, bruh.